Hi, everyone. Do standardized tests truly measure how well our kids perform in school and life? That's what some educators are asking, since No Child Left Behind is up for congressional renewal this year. President Bush signed the No Child Left Behind Act into law back in 2002. It requires schools to test students in grades 3 to 8 every year in reading and math. Schools that fail to make progress face severe penalties like decreased funding. New proposals would make the penalties even harsher. Schools should be held to high standards, but some argue high-stakes testing has forced teachers to teach to the test, giving schools an excuse to cut civics and art classes because they're not a part of federal tests. Parents and teachers should work together on decisions about what and how children learn and find sensible ways to measure that. And Washington should do its homework and not just rubber stamp the bill. That's a page from my notebook. I'm Katie Couric, CBS News.
Is regular testing needed to improve academic performance? By
Newlove
and Sharina Morrow. Today we'll be talking about the past and present history of testing. We'll start with the 18th century. Testing has been around since the 18th century in school systems, when standardized testing was introduced in Boston schools by reformer Horace Mann and Samuel Gridley Howe to provide the quality of teaching by gathering objective information and being able to judge and compare the output of each school by a single standard. Did you know that the first standardized test was actually known to have been administered in the 7th century to government job applicants in Emperor China? It was in the format of an 8-part essay. Next, we'll be talking about the 19th century, accountability. In the 19th century, students were held more accountable for their academic performance. They were tested to see if they mastered the skills and abilities that were taught to them. If the students failed the test, they were held accountable and they were held back. Teachers were also tested on their knowledge of education and had to pass the test in order to teach, but after being hired, they didn't have to go back to school to take any more tests, leaving all accountability of pass or fail to the students. In the 20th century, the field of educational psychology was established, which changed the way that tests were designed and administered. Educational psychologists were very interested in the change educational testing after being a big contribution to the College of Education. Edward Thorndike, who taught at Columbia University, led the first part of the 20th century in improving that the education could be an exact science. Thorndike, a progressive of his time, wanted to perfect tests to measure academic performance, but not use them for accountability, but for intentions of strengthening the profession of teachers. Thorndike was one of the many psychologists who developed the progressive education movement, which was a testing movement that focused more on the profession of education. Progressive educators' plans were to make schools less academic and focus more on a child's social development. As progressive ideals evolved, schools were encouraged to practice social promotion, which meant regardless of the students' academic performance, they were to be pushed forward to the next level. So even though they failed the test and assessments or whatever test was needed to be promoted, they will be promoted anyway. They will not be held accountable. Progressive were concerned that a child that was retained, which was associated with failure, would cause stress and depression on the child socially. So even though testing was administered on a regular basis in school, no one will be held accountable.
In the 21st century, accountability changed. Standardized tests were used more, and in 2002, when the No Child Left Behind Act required annual testing in all 50 states. During this time, the United States dropped from the 18th rank in math to the 31st in 2009. Students, teachers, schools, and school districts were now held accountable for test performance. Low scores could prevent a student from progressing to the next grade or lead a teacher to get fired. High scores ensured funding from federal and locals and used rewards for teachers and administration by money. Failures in education have been blamed on rising poverty, teacher quality, and increase on standard tests. Many kinds of standard tests are in use, but high stakes have created the most controversy. George W. Bush signed the No Child Left Behind Act, which mandated annual testing in reading and math, and later in science, from grades 3rd through 8, and again in 10th. The No Child Left Behind Act requires 100% of U.S. students to be proficient on reading and math by 2014. In 2009, President Barack Obama's Race to the Top program was signed into law, which allows states to compete for extra funding based on test scores. On March 9, 2011, the U.S. Educational Secretary to Congress stated 82% of American schools would fail to meet the No Child Left Behind's goal of 100% proficiency by 2014. In 2010, Florida adopted the standard for Common Core, phasing them through within the last 2 years through kindergarten and second grade. By 2014, all grades should have completed the transition. The new standards mean a new test. Instead of using the Florida Comprehensive Assessment Test, Florida has been developing tests called the Partnership for Assessment of Readiness for College and Careers. Since there has not been an agreement whether tests improve academic performance, tests will continue to be administered to show student comprehension and agreement. Students still take tests, therefore we have to prep them.
You are to make sure that when you're prepping your students for the exam, they do not take a test on an empty stomach, and let them know that they need to get a good night's rest. They are to have 2 number 2 pencils, sharpen, a bottled water, a peppermint, which I heard helps get the brain moving, and a snack, which preferably they use crackers or fruit snacks, and the piece of paper if they need to take notes or write down math answers.
As a parent, you've heard a lot about standardized tests, and you probably have a lot of questions, like, where did these tests come from? Are they effective, accurate, and fair? Pearson wants to help you answer these questions. Let's take a look at how that test arrives in front of your child so you can see the whole process for yourself. Every test really begins with state standards. A committee of educators, administrators, and experts carefully construct a set of standards that specify what a student should know by the end of the school year. These guidelines are the foundations for both classroom instruction and assessments. Once content standards are in place, the state selects a testing partner to work closely with educators and administrators in developing the assessment. Developing a test can take up to 3 years to complete. Why so long? Because Pearson follows the highest standards established by these key organizations. It's a highly collaborative process. Everyone comes together to create an accurate and useful tool for evaluating your child's learning. Here's how it's done. First, education experts, most of whom are former or current teachers from the state and who have deep expertise of the subjects and grade level, create test questions that test what's being taught. These range from multiple choice to essay questions and more. State education experts, classroom teachers, and higher education faculty review each question multiple times. Everyone works together to ensure that each question addresses state standards, and a lot of time is given to verify that there is only one correct answer to each question. The questions are then field tested with groups of students. A field test is a test of each question before it can be used for student scores. Only field test questions that perform well and are fair are accepted for use on a future test. Field test scores never count as part of a student's score. It's important to see if differences like gender or race affected how students responded and whether the responses accurately reflect how students are doing in school. The results are reviewed, and if an item doesn't perform well, it's dropped. When the final test is assembled, a mix of challenging and easier questions are chosen to provide a good range of knowledge and skill assessment. The test isn't final until everyone involved verifies it as an effective measurement of what students have learned. Lastly, states make decisions about how well students must perform to pass or be proficient. Performance standards give a frame of reference for understanding the test scores. They help parents, educators, and administrators clearly understand how well students are learning. It's only after this rigorous multi-year process that a test makes its way to your child's classroom. Now that we've reviewed what goes into making a test, we hope that when the next test day rolls around, you'll have fewer questions and more answers.